This map shows the current boundary between Central and Eastern Time, focusing on where the boundary passes through Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. This boundary also passes through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and the Florida Panhandle. The last change to the boundary line was in November of 2007. The original boundary line included the entire state of Michigan, Indiana, and Kentucky in Central Time and cut through the states of Ohio, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia. The boundary shown on this map is the second official boundary drawn by the Interstate Commerce Commission. The initial boundary included Toledo and Columbus in Eastern Time and was in effect January 1 to June 1, 1919. Railroads played a major part in the definition of time zones. Note how the official description includes south of and parallel with or west of and parallel with specific railroads. These lines divided counties. Where the line divided a city, the entire city was defined as being in Eastern or Central Time. One early change was to restore the Toledo area to Eastern Time. The boundary ran through the city along railroads to Monroeville. The city of Detroit was also added to Eastern Time in 1922. In 1924, the boundary moved west again. This restored Central Ohio from Columbus to Gallipolis to Eastern Time following the original January 1919 line, plus new territory east of a more direct line between Toledo and Columbus. The boundary continued to follow railroads. Later in 1924, a further adjustment west was made in northern Ohio. In 1927, a larger portion of Ohio was added to Eastern Time. The new boundary was immediately west and parallel with the B&O Railroad between Toledo and Cincinnati, and immediately south and parallel with the C&O Railroad south of the Ohio River. Finally, in 1936, the remainder of Ohio was moved to Eastern Time, along with the entire lower peninsula of Michigan. Petitions to add the northern peninsula of Michigan and Chicago were denied. In 1941, the Interstate Commerce Commission's attention was focused on Georgia, which moved from a railroad-defined boundary to the northern and western state lines. After World War II, the Interstate Commerce Commission acted again, moving portions of southeastern Kentucky and Tennessee to Eastern Time. This change placed Virginia and North Carolina entirely in Eastern Time. In 1949, two counties not moved in 1947 were added to Eastern Time. At this point, two segments of the boundary were still based on railroads. In 1960, a large section of Kentucky was added to Eastern Time. The boundary in southern Kentucky and Tennessee was moved to the nearest county line to the west of the old railroad-based line. At this point, all railroad-based references were removed from the definition of the boundary. All of the previous moves led to changes in Indiana. Proponents from the Indianapolis area proposed moving the majority of the state to Eastern Time. The Interstate Commerce Commission, in their final time zone boundary change, decided to place the line through the center of the state along county lines, except for the counties around Indianapolis. Despite where the boundary was drawn, individual communities and counties set their own standards of time. From 1919 to 1966, there was no national standard for daylight saving time except for a brief period of advanced time during World War II that went by the name wartime. In 1966, Congress passed the Uniform Time Act, requiring states and local governments follow the standard time defined by law. Daylight saving time was coordinated nationwide with permission granted to entire states to opt out. The entire state rule led to a problem in Indiana. Indiana was not allowed to exempt the Eastern Time portion of the state without also exempting the Central Time portion of the state. This led to a period of time where the Central Time counties officially did not observe Central Daylight Time, but most people in those counties unofficially observed the same time as Illinois and Western Kentucky. In 1967, the governor of Indiana tried to fix the daylight saving time issue by petitioning to move the entire state back to Central Time. The Department of Transportation held hearings and eventually decided to move most of Indiana to Eastern Time, leaving 12 counties in Central Time and asking Congress to change the law to allow Indiana to opt out of daylight time in the Eastern Time Zone without affecting the Central Time Zone. Unofficial time zone observances continued in Indiana, with residents near Cincinnati and Louisville observing Eastern Standard Time in the summer months. In 1973, the Department of Transportation allowed most of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to move to Eastern Time. In 1977, Pike County in southern Indiana decided to follow Indianapolis time instead of Evansville time, and the Department of Transportation changed the boundary. In 1991, Stark County in northern Indiana decided to follow South Bend and Indianapolis time instead of LaPorte and Chicago time. The Department of Transportation accepted their petition and changed the boundary. In 2000, the Department of Transportation moved Wayne County, Kentucky to Eastern Time. Indiana continued to observe Central Time with daylight saving and Eastern Time without daylight saving, with a few counties still unofficially observing Eastern Daylight Time. After 36 years of not observing daylight saving time, the state of Indiana decided in 2005 to begin observing daylight saving time effective April of 2006. As part of a deal with the legislature, the governor asked the Department of Transportation to hold hearings and determine where the boundary should be drawn through Indiana. Since no specific time zone was requested, nor was the governor authorized to specify a line, the Department of Transportation asked counties to file petitions specifying in which time zone they wanted to be placed. Facing the state's requested deadline of April 2006, the Department of Transportation followed a slightly accelerated process. In January of 2006, the decision was made to move 8 counties to Central Time. This caused an immediate problem for Pulaski County. Despite making an argument to move to Central Time, they did not expect to be moved without neighboring counties. 1 year later, Pulaski County officially returned to Eastern Time. Later in 2007, 5 counties in southern Indiana returned to Eastern Time. This led to a net change of 2 counties, Stark and Perry, that were moved to Central Time. This map shows the net change. The furthest east that the boundary was ever drawn contrasted with the current line. Efforts continue in Indiana to change the boundary, but without overwhelming statewide support, no change is expected.